So if you wanted to, go out and just get to know nature a little bit better, or if you wanted to do a study where you're like, thinking, oh, I'd like to compare, the plants which I see in this habitat versus, that habitat. That can be intimidating at first because you're like, oh, I'm not an expert on plants. All right. Well, what I what I have here on my website is I have, some, I mean, there's all these books you can buy, like, A Key for Trees of Our Area or Flowers of Our Area. But on my website, I had a couple. So if you went into the wildlife of the Northeast US, I have some plants, including their keys, etc. So let me just kind of start off with um, horsetails. So if you were to see a horsetail and you're like, oh, I'm not an expert on horsetails, but there's only two that grow in our area. So you have to ask myself the question, is it a tall olive with no branches from the stem, or do we see whorled branches here? If you click there, it's like, oh, and this is what it looks like just growing up here. You're like, oh, that would be the rough horsetail. Whereas over here, we see this is the field horsetail. So those are the two that occur in our area. So that was easy. There's only two. If you were to look, oh, here's this other type of thing. It stays evergreen. I think that was one of those lycopods, one of those club mosses that we talked about. Which one might it be? Well, luckily now in our area, there are three. All right, so you're just kind of asking your question, is there a horizontal stem above the ground? The leaves flex upwards. Does it resemble a small tree? Does it rebranch irregularly, resembling the leaves of a cedar plant? So you could go, between one of those. All right, so far that's easy enough. But now if you were to look at ferns, there's more. And what you want to do on keys, once again, is start asking questions which say, all right, well, based on your answer, I'm just going to go to this area now. I'm not going to consider all ferns. I'm trying to narrow it down until I'm getting smaller and smaller. So am I looking at ferns with a tall naked leaf axis where all the leaflets are located at the top of the leaf in a horizontal plane? In other words, do I see a fern where it grows up and there's nothing green, no leaves here? Like it just has like the stem of a tree. And then all the leaflets occur like at the top, like kind of in a flat plane. If I say yes, that's what I'm looking at. Well, then is it tall, about 3 feet tall with triangular leaves, or only about 1.5 feet tall with a black stem? In which case, here it's bracken fern, right, where it's got like this stem that grows straight up and then the leaflets are in a flat plane there, or it's maidenhair fern, all right, where now it's got a black stem. And you say, okay, so now instead of all of the ferns, it was just those two. Okay. Is it a small fern whose leaflets are entire, like they don't have lobes to them? In which case now we're looking at one of those three. All right, and I can distinguish between those. All right. Is it a large fern more than 3 feet tall? Okay, well, there's four of those. If it's more than 3 feet tall, then we're asking, is it interrupted fern, where you'll see some spore producing leaflets in the middle, cinnamon fern, where the fertile fronds produce all spores and look this light brown in color. Okay. Or if it's a medium-sized fern, it turns out there's even more of those. All right. But then you say, all right, it's medium-sized. And so am I looking at dark green leaflets with light brown scales, in which case now I'm looking at a wood fern, or et cetera. So there are some assignments where I'll give you some of this information. So you're looking at a medium-sized fern with toothed and divided leaves with dark green leaflets. And if you went then to this key, you would say, all right, I'm going to go to medium-sized fern. So if I gave you a picture and a description, so here's a picture and here's a description of the fern. It's a medium-sized fern without a, tall, you'd be like, oh, okay, so it's this category. And if it's got dark green leaflets, okay, it's this category, and if it's got, thin leaves, oh, it's this one. Or something. So I can give you a picture and text, which would let you kind of walk through these keys to answer those. Okay. And then the same thing with trees. All right, so one of the first questions, are we looking at like a pine tree relative? That's in our area, it's going to be green all year round. One of the gymnosperms. All right, so pine, cedars, and the relatives. So if it's not like an oak or a maple in these categories, if it's a gymnosperm here. All right. Then I asked myself, all right, well, are the needles joined into bundles? So you have a couple of needles all sticking together. Okay. Are there single needles joined to the twigs, not forming a bundle, or are the leaves flat and scale-like? And so if you see a picture and I give you text that say like the needles are in bundles of 5, you say, all right, well, it's a gymnosperm. Needles are in bundles, so it's a pine. All right. Groups of 5, groups of 5, groups of 5. Oh, there we go. White pine, the most common pine in our area, groups of 5. All right. So what you did is just you kept narrowing it down based on that. If I ask you about compound leaves, what a compound leaf is, this is a little more complicated, but if you look at where the widened bud is, it's not there. All right, so the bud isn't there. It's all the way down there. That's because this is one leaf. And therefore, if you're trying to identify leaves, just getting to know the compound trees in our area. So if you look at where is the bud, like there's no bud there or there, it would actually be at the base. All right, and so once you realize, oh, I'm looking at compound leaves, trees, now you've narrowed your trees down to a smaller subset. All right. Are the compound leaves opposite? And by opposite, I mean one goes out this way and another one goes out just the opposite direction. All right. If it is, there aren't many of those. It's either elderberry or it's one of the ash trees. All right. And so we could say, oh, look, look, one goes out here, one goes out there. These are opposite leaves. So once again, this would all be considered one leaf because there's no bud here. So that's a compound leaf. All right. As opposed to if it's not compound, it's what we call alternate, where maybe one leaf goes out here and one leaf goes out there. All right. And so then you say, are we looking at, are there thorns on the branches? In which case, it's one of the locusts. All right. So here it's like, oh, okay. So here you can see, there are thorns on the branches there. All right. Are there 5 to 9 leaflets? In which case, we might be looking at the hickories. All right. And some of the hickories have like this shaggy bark, shag bark hickory. So that helps. Or do we have like 7 to 41 leaflets in a line? All right. So here's Tree of Heaven, which has all of these leaflets. And, even if this isn't, your major concern, there's an invasive fly called the spotted lanternfly. This is their preferred host tree. So if you wanted to stop spotted lanternflies from getting in your area where they might affect your orchard or your vineyard or your whatever, then you'd certainly want to cut down the invasive Tree of Heaven. So there are a couple of assignments which just ask you to go to the pages of my website, or there will follow links there where it says, all right, so here's a tree with compound leaves. It has 5 to 9 alternate, leaflets and alternate leaves, etc. And then you would just kind of go through here and identify. And then the point is, let's say you're going on a hike or you wanted to go on a comparison and say, oh, do I see different trees on this trail than I do on this trail, that you would be able to. You're just using this keys. All right, so the needles are in bundles of 5. That's a white pine, or they're in bundles of 3. There's a pitch pine, and that could be an interesting study. Like, I only see white pines over here, but here on top of the mountain, I see pitch pines. Oh, that's interesting. Maybe pitch pines are adapted to a different habitat than white pines, and not only would that affect the pines, but also any animals that fed on them. All right. And I also then have a couple of assignments where it's an animated interactive where it simulates a field trip. All right. So let me just kind of, forgive me, I'm going to pause for 1 second. All right. So on, if there was one of those interactives, like the ones for the interactives for the keys that for the compound leaves, that one in particular sticks for some people. So if you ever were doing one of those and it stuck, like the compound leaf one or the gymnosperm one, just send me an email and I'll give you credit. I know that some people that they have a little trouble on that. So don't worry about that. So if I were to do this Trees of the Heritage Trail, Are all species of trees equally common on heritage trail regions? Yes, obviously it's the wrong answer, so nothing happened, so I would click no. So what it's asking is, let's say that I were to go from Goshen to this first section of the Heritage Trail. All right. If you're to hike this, there are some compound leaves that you'll see. So there's black locust. Which one is black locust? Oh, okay, that's black locust. All right. Then there's tree of heaven. So just kind of like, oh, this one looks like that one looks like that one. So you'll drag it to this. So if you were to hike that, you would look for compound leaves. Then there are some that have simple leaves, they're not compound, and they're opposite, so that one grows out to the left, one grows out to the right. One's a honeysuckle. These leaves do not look like a honeysuckle. That looks like the sugar maple, whereas this one looks like the honeysuckle there. So you'll have to know the difference between those two. All right. Here are alternate simple leaves. All right. So notice, oh, slippery elm looks like that. Black oak looks like that. All right. And so therefore, these are the ones that you would see if you walk the first mile. And then I then ask you to then look at the tree shape and then drag them to the category. So there are, here in green, there are trees with compound leaves you would see in this first mile. Tree of heaven, black walnut, shagbark, hickory. So I was, oh, black walnut. All right, so I would see that in this category. What else did I say? Staghorn sum, no. Shagbark, hickory, where are you? Shagbark, hickory. Tree of heaven is in there, and shagbark, hickory. Oh, there you go. Right, so I would see those. Sugar maple, silky dogwood, and Tartarian honeysuckle. There's those. If you tried to drag the wrong one, notice that the red panicle dogwood's not a correct answer. That does not drag. And then sugar maple here, and black oak has alternate leaves. So there's not an endless number of trees that you would see in this section, just these different ones, a couple with compound leaves, a couple with simple. All right, so you submit. All right, great. Now you're ready to hike the next section. So if I were to do the next section, I just repeat that. Along this way, you'll see different trees with compound leaves. So you would see white ash and smooth sumac. You would see different plants with simple opposite leaves. You would see common catalpa, which has flowers. Sugar maple, that was the same as last time. So sometimes you'll see the same trees here. Now you'll see some ones with alternate leaves like chestnut oak, black cherry, submit. Okay, and then I would do this again. But so here, we've just done a scientific experiment. You could say compare the trees that you find along this stretch of the Heritage Trail versus the trees from that stretch of the Heritage Trail. So even if you're not a tree expert, there aren't that many compound leaf trees to choose from. So whether you're doing a simulated one or you were doing this on your own, all right, you could start doing a comparison now if you wanted to. All right, even, I mean, when some people start it, they say like, I'm not that good with plants or fungi or whatever. You could just even describe as leaf shape 1, leaf shape 2. All right, but don't let not being an expert stop you from asking a question. Is this a different habitat? Am I finding different trees? You could answer that today. So these were kind of meant to, encourage you to do that. Like, look, I can identify ferns at least a little. I can identify trees at least a little. I could pretend I'm walking a section of a trail and distinguish between, that the trees in this section are different from the trees of that section, etc.